Probably know Robert Carradine and Curtis Armstrong from the Revenge of the Nerds movies. Robert played the dorky lead role of Lewis, and Curtis was the burping, nose-picking guy known as Booger. The two actors have combined forces to create King of the Nerds, a reality show on TBS that pits nerds against each other in a house. We're pleased to have Robert and Curtis on the phone with us today. Hey, fellas, how's it
Hey,
going?
Patrick.
Hello, Patrick.
Talk about how you initially ended up hosting this show.
Well, it was our idea. Uh, we actually thought of it 6 years ago, and we took it around, but it didn't quite. It wasn't the timing wasn't right. And a couple of years ago, luckily, my wife remembered that we had taken this thing around and said, "Why don't you call Curtis and see if we can launch that show again?" So I called my agent, and my agent had a connection to Electus, which ultimately led to being one of our production partners, and that's how it came about.
So we went actually to we met with Electus and with 5x5 Media, both of which have a lot of experience in different types of reality shows. And we just went to them and proposed it to them, and they flipped and thought it was a great idea. And so they proposed it to a couple of networks, actually, and we were very lucky that TBS said yes. So we were very happy.
Yes, at the time that we were taking the show around, we were secretly hoping that TBS was going to be the one because of, they have a massive footprint, so that's a really good place to be.
And we all know about the past with the Nerds flicks, but would either of you describe yourselves as nerd-like in your real lives?
Well, I know that Curtis has a nerd component in his love of Sherlock Holmes, and I have a nerd component in my love of radio control models. But I'm not really. I wouldn't describe myself offhand as a nerd.
The funny thing about it is, and it's just occurring to me now, that in Revenge of the Nerds, you come across as the ultimate nerd, and I come across as sort of not a nerd at all, but just somebody who happens to be with them. And yet in our real life, you have very little nerd component, and I'm just a total geek or nerd, if you take the general interpretation of the word. I mean, I have this Sherlock Holmes thing. In fact, tomorrow morning I'm leaving for New York, and I'm going to be attending the 159th birthday celebration of Sherlock Holmes with the Baker Street Irregulars there.
And that's pretty nerdy, Curtis.
I'm telling you, man, it's really. But I mean, I have other nerd qualities. I mean, I'm a music nerd. I mean, there's, I did, I was part of the chess club. I was part of the debate team. I mean, I did that stuff. And, it's hard to, you get older, but, that doesn't go away. So I have to say I'm pretty nerdy.
Well, Robert, this one's for you. All these competitors have this level of likability to them. So explain a little bit, what is it about, I don't know, these so-called nerds that makes them so lovable on a show like this?
Well, I'd say if you put it in one word, it'd be their optimism. They're just so up and optimistic that you can't help but fall in love with them. Some of them have their quirks, but that turns out to be a very attractive component to the television aspect of it as well, because you want to have some controversy. You want to have, challenges amongst these people while they're living together. And they rose to the occasion wonderfully. They're just incredible human beings who love life and all things nerdy. We couldn't have done better in our casting, I must say.
In case you're just joining us, we're talking to actors Robert Carradine and Curtis Armstrong about their new hit reality show, King of the Nerds, airing right now on TBS. Hey, Curtis, how much fun is it being on this show, particularly like during the nerd offs? Like you said, you're a fan of chess, and then the first nerd off is this giant chess game.
Yeah, I mean, it was that part of it was fun, although it was about 110 degrees that day. So what I really remember about the chess was feeling like I was melting into my shoes. So the on-camera part was fun, but it was not to me as fun as the executive producer part, where once we were done with all of the on-camera stuff, we could go to the monitors and we could be there for hours and hours. You know, I used to come in. My family was out of town at that time. I had no reason to be home. I was pathetic. I used to go in like at 7 in the morning. You know, it would be before, 3 hours before the actual executive producers showed up, because I would be there with the night crew. I became obsessed with it. I mean, just watching them,
It got to the point where we had to pry him out of the control room.
It was ridiculous. I mean, it was ridiculous. I had no life for 8 weeks except staring at these nerds and going from 1 week to the next, having a different one be my favorite. I mean, it was just, they told me I was going down the rabbit hole and they were going to have to, do an intervention or something because I was losing all perspective.
You have these guys on the show that they talk about, they're always picked last, they always, left out, that kind of thing. And so you have this show where they are going to be booted off. They're I don't know, a sense going into that you have to be more gentle with these guys. Almost like it almost seems like you're hurting their feelings more than, your typical elimination show.
Yeah.
Well, when somebody loses the nerd off, we try to be gentle with them. And also, their fellow competitors are so truly saddened when one of their own gets kicked off, even though that means that they get to fight another day. I just think it's one of the components of being a nerd is that they're very loving of each other, and they hate to see when one of them has to get sent home.
And even when they get tense with each other, which obviously happens during the course of this thing as they're there longer and longer, the most interesting thing is to see what has happened, once now it's all over. They've gone back to, they're all tweeting each other and all this kind of stuff. So it's been, for them, these are people who were brought up sort of being on the fringes. And they have, most of them, found their niche in the world as nerds, but they all remember what it was like to be in elementary school or junior high school and not have any friends because everyone else thought you were weird. And so we're in a situation where it's not like some reality shows where people vote you off. This is one where people compete. And so they come into it understanding all, the ramifications of how this is set up. And so when the nerd off happens, one person is going to wind up losing. And for the most part, I think they took it incredibly well, especially having to deal with all of the stress that they were under, just having, 6 cameras in the room all the time.
Yes, they have absolutely no privacy, but they finally got to a point where they were able to sort of ignore that intrusion and just be themselves.
I've only seen the one episode, so I can't gauge the entire show, but it does seem like this has more heart than your typical elimination style reality show. Is that the case, and why do you think that is?
Well, that was our mandate going in, was that we were going to celebrate these people and should put them in a loving light. We weren't going to be in attack mode like some of the other reality shows.
So it really was very much intended. There were 2 things that Bobby and I thought about at the very beginning when we were first working this out. One was that element, the heart element, and not having it be nasty and mean-spirited. And the other, strangely enough, was the idea that we had to make clear to people that when we said King of the Nerds, we meant both genders. We wanted women as well as men in the house. So those were really, because in a strange way, and I know this was true back when we first pitched it years ago, there was sort of this understanding, this sort of idea when you would talk about it, like, well, if they're nerds, then they're, these fanboys sitting around with their comic books and their video games. And, Robert and I both thought, well, there's nothing quite as dull as that. So we really pushed for the fact that this be
Yes, it'd be co-ed.
The crazy thing is, next year is the 30-year anniversary of Revenge of the Nerds, and with you two both being involved in that, going back that far, talk a little bit about your relationship with each other. Obviously, you're connecting on this project here. How you guys have stayed in contact all these years.
Well, it was one of those movies where everybody had such a good time that when we do connect up with each other, it's like no time has passed. And Curtis and I have kept in touch on and off over the years, as we have with some of our other nerds, like Don Gibb, Ogre. It's kind of he's a nerdy guy in some of the later films, and Larry B. Scott, Brian Tochi, Julia Montgomery.
Larry B.
We did have a reunion. Was that 20 years ago, Curtis? A 20-year reunion?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think they took photographs and everything, and it was amazing. Hardly anybody had changed, really.
Robert and I would, personally, we would just, get together every once in a while. We would either talk on the phone or we would meet for dinner somewhere or something, and it was just very casual, just because, every once in a while you think about a person, you go, God, I miss that person. And so we would keep in touch, and now we're sort of living in each other's pockets.
Well, I'm a child of the 80s, and you go back and you look over that whole decade and all the great shows and movies that were on, and Booger is one of the guys that stands out for me. Do you find, Curtis, that these younger kids, like the ones that are on this show, don't understand the power of Booger?
No, I wouldn't say that I did. I would say that I'm not going to go into detail, but Booger definitely lives on in this group and in more than one person. But that's all I'm going to say.
Are there any highlights that from this season that you guys want to mention or talk about?
I mean, describing the challenges is difficult because some of them are so complicated. I just think it's a wonderful damn show. I love it, and I just hope everybody watches it.
Yeah, I would say that, we had a challenge where we had our contestants on segways going through a maze, and that was a great moment because, it's not often that you see nerds trying to navigate a maze on something with an engine. So that was a dear moment. Yeah, that was a good moment, and I just think that there's something in it for everybody.
All right, guys. Well, I appreciate the conversation. I really enjoyed that first episode, and I can't wait to see the rest of the season.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks to Robert Carradine and Curtis Armstrong for joining us today on KGPR. Tune in to their new show, King of the Nerds, every Thursday at 8 p.m. on TBS.